She went in to clean and saw a crying baby, but his skin was turning blue, and time was running out. Hey there, friends. Welcome back to the channel. So today, I've got a wild story for you. Imagine this. You walk into a house to do your usual cleaning job, and suddenly you find a baby crying with his skin turning blue, and time is running out. Sounds intense, right? Well, don't worry, I've got all the details coming up, but I do have to warn you it's going to get your heart racing. But hey, before we dive in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, Stories TH. And hey, I'd love to know where are you watching from today. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now take a deep breath, relax, and let's jump into this story together. The unexpected start. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day for Olivia. A quick cleaning job, a few hours of work, and then she could go home to her small apartment, make a cup of tea, and unwind. As an independent cleaning service provider, Olivia didn't get much downtime. Most of her clients were busy professionals, and the pay was decent enough to keep the lights on and make ends meet. But today, something felt different as she stepped through the grand entrance of the sprawling mansion she was supposed to clean. The house was breathtaking, its marble floors glimmering under the soft sunlight that filtered through massive windows. The expensive furniture looked almost too pristine to touch, and the scent of freshly cut flowers lingered in the air. It was the kind of house that only the wealthiest could afford. Everything seemed meticulously placed, as if frozen in time, awaiting a life that was as perfect as its surroundings. She had been hired by the family just a few weeks ago. At first, she was hesitant. She was just a worker, and the idea of stepping foot into such a high-end world didn't sit well with her. But the job paid well, and that was the only thing that mattered. Olivia didn't dwell on it much. She kept her head down, did her work, and stayed out of sight. That morning, Olivia was cleaning the upstairs rooms when she heard something strange. At first, she thought it was just the sound of a toy or maybe a pet. But then she heard it again. A faint, desperate cry. It was coming from one of the bedrooms. Her instincts kicked in, and she moved swiftly, her heart beginning to race. The voice sounded so small, so fragile, as though it could barely hold on. She pushed the door open slowly, trying not to disturb the silence of the immaculate space. But when she stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. There, in the middle of the room, was the source of the cry, a tiny baby, no more than a few months old, lying alone in a crib. Olivia froze for a moment, staring at the baby in disbelief. What was it doing here, alone? The house was massive, yet no one else seemed to be around. The room was eerily quiet, except for the baby's soft cries, growing more desperate with every passing second. But then, something else caught her attention, something much more terrifying. The baby's skin was turning blue. It was a sight she had never seen before. Panic rose in Olivia's chest as her mind scrambled for an explanation. What was happening? Why wasn't anyone here? The baby's cries were growing weaker, each breath more labored than the last. Time felt like it was slowing down. She could feel her heart racing, her palms sweating as the weight of the situation crashed down on her. Olivia moved toward the crib, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that she didn't have much time. There was no one around to help. She had to act, and she had to act fast. But Olivia was no doctor. What was she supposed to do? She had no experience with babies, let alone one in such a critical state. She reached down, her hands trembling, and picked up the baby gently. The baby's tiny body was limp, and Olivia could feel the coldness seeping into her own skin as she held it. The room felt suddenly colder, and she could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The baby's breath was shallow, its skin still an unnatural shade of blue. She panicked again, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was urgency. She had to do something, anything, to save this child. But what? Olivia's mind raced. She remembered a few things from a first aid course she'd taken years ago, basic steps that might help in a life or death situation. Could they work now? Would they even be enough? Her heart sank as she realized the full weight of the situation. She was alone in a house filled with wealth and luxury. Yet here she was, a cleaner, standing with a child in her arms who might not make it if she didn't act quickly. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on her. She had spent her life cleaning the houses of the rich, but now, in this moment of crisis, she was the one who needed help. Tears started to well up in Olivia's eyes as she fought to hold it together. She couldn't let herself break down now, not with the baby depending on her. She glanced around the room for anything she could use, any help she could get, but the space was as sterile as the rest of the house. No phone, no sign of anyone. Olivia took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. She gently placed the baby back into the crib, carefully positioning it so that its head was slightly elevated. She had heard once that this could help open the airways. Her hands were still trembling, but she pushed forward. She had no choice. But just as she was about to continue, she heard footsteps approaching the door. Olivia's head snapped toward the sound. Could it be? Were they finally here? Was someone coming to help? Her chest tightened, her hopes rising, but also something else, a new fear. What if the family returned and thought she had done something wrong? What if they blamed her for the baby's condition? Would they even care enough to thank her? Olivia's stomach churned as she waited for the door to open. Her heart hammered in her chest, the seconds feeling like hours. Would she be able to save the baby? Or was she about to lose everything? The urgency of the moment. The footsteps grew louder, each step echoing in the stillness of the room. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she turned her gaze toward the door, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it the family? Were they back already? Or perhaps it was someone else, someone who could help. The door creaked open, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Standing in the doorway was a man, tall, sharply dressed, with an air of confidence that seemed to radiate from him. He was handsome, but there was something about him that struck Olivia as distant, detached from the urgency of the situation. He looked at her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Was this the father? The way he carried himself, the expensive suit, the cold, controlled demeanor, it had to be. The man standing before her had all the signs of wealth and status. But he wasn't looking at the baby. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the immaculate room around them, as if she were intruding on his private space. I'm just the cleaner," Olivia stammered, trying to keep her composure despite the panic flooding her chest. "The baby. I found the baby. Alone. I think it's in trouble." Her words hung in the air like a delicate thread, waiting for him to respond. But instead of rushing to the baby's side, the man's eyes flicked toward the crib, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. The baby's cries had stopped, and the air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. His skin was still blue, the color of his lips even darker, and Olivia could see the faint rise and fall of his tiny chest as he fought for every breath. Finally, the man moved, stepping toward the crib with a fluid grace that seemed almost rehearsed. He knelt beside the baby, his hands hovering above the child's delicate body for a moment before he gently placed one hand on the baby's chest. His fingers seemed to pulse with a quiet power, as if he were assessing the situation in a way Olivia couldn't understand. Olivia stood frozen, watching him, her mind scrambling to make sense of everything that was happening. The man's calmness in the face of a crisis was unsettling. He wasn't panicking like she was. He wasn't even showing any signs of emotion. Was he really the father? How could someone so composed stand in front of a baby in such a dire condition and not show any visible fear or worry? "Is there anyone else here?" the man asked, his tone almost detached, as if discussing something trivial. "Do you have a phone?" Olivia nodded, her fingers reaching into her pocket for her own cell phone. But before she could answer, he raised a hand to stop her. "It's too late for that now," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, almost cold. "There's nothing that can be done by calling anyone else. We need to act now." She blinked, confused. What did he mean by that? She felt a sinking sensation in her stomach, her gut telling her that this man knew more than he was letting on. Why would he say that? Was he just trying to calm her down, or was there something deeper at play? Olivia's mind flashed back to the moments before the man entered. She had felt the weight of the situation, the desperation that clung to the air. But here he was, this stranger, speaking as though everything could be controlled, as if he had all the time in the world. The man stood up slowly, turning toward Olivia with a slight tilt of his head. "You're in the way," he said, his voice softer now, but still edged with a quiet authority. "Move aside." She hesitated. She wanted to argue, to demand he show more urgency, but something about the way he spoke made her take a step back. Was it fear? Respect? She wasn't sure, but she obeyed, stepping aside as he took his place by the crib. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver device. Olivia watched in stunned silence as he pressed a few buttons, the device making a soft beep as it powered up. It looked like a medical gadget, something out of a hospital. The man's movements were smooth, practiced. She had the distinct feeling he'd done this before. What was going on? Who was this man? The device let out a soft, almost imperceptible beep, and the man nodded, satisfied. He looked up at Olivia, his eyes cold, calculating. "It's too late," he repeated, almost as if speaking to himself. "This child's condition is irreversible. The damage is done." Olivia's heart dropped, the world around her tilting in a way she couldn't quite process. "What? No, you don't understand. We need to help him, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. The man's gaze softened just for a moment, and he seemed to consider her words. Then, with a deep sigh, he straightened, standing to his full height, his hands clasped in front of him. "I can't fix this," he said quietly, his voice carrying a note of finality. "No one can. Not now." Olivia's world seemed to shatter in that moment. Her hands clenched at her sides, her chest tightening as waves of frustration and disbelief surged through her. She wanted to scream, to shake him, to demand that he do something, anything. But the cold reality was sinking in. The man, this stranger, was right. Time had run out. There was nothing she could do. But then, in the midst of her despair, something flickered in the back of her mind. The baby wasn't gone. Not yet. There was still a chance, she thought, as if a single thread of hope remained, fragile but unwavering. Olivia turned to the man, her voice low but filled with determination. "I don't care what you say. I'm not giving up on this baby." And with that, she moved back toward the crib, her eyes locked on the tiny form of the child, knowing that in this moment, everything had changed. The final push. Olivia's hands shook as she hovered over the baby's crib, staring at the fragile life before her. The man's words echoed in her mind, but she refused to let them define the situation. She couldn't just walk away. Not now, not after everything. Her pulse quickened as her gaze locked onto the baby's pale face. Its lips, blue and tinged with desperation, trembled with every faint breath. She felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness, but the thought of just standing there, doing nothing, was unbearable. She couldn't let that happen. Not on her watch. The man's words still weighed heavily on her mind, and she couldn't shake the cold finality in his tone. He had given up already, as if the clock had already run out on this poor child. But Olivia wasn't ready to surrender. She wasn't the kind of person who could walk away from a life in need. She had always believed that, even in the darkest moments, there was always something that could be done. "Please," she whispered to the baby, her voice breaking as she reached down to touch its tiny, trembling fingers. "Please don't give up." She glanced up at the man, her determination hardening in her chest. He stood across the room, watching her with that same detached look on his face, his eyes colder than ever. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, almost dismissively. "It's too late for you to change anything." But Olivia's resolve only strengthened. She wouldn't let his cynicism dictate what she could or couldn't do. She was no doctor, no expert in saving lives, but she knew that there was always something that could be tried, and right now, she had to trust her instincts. She glanced around the room, desperate for any clue, any tool that might help. Her eyes landed on the baby's changing table, where a few items were neatly arranged. A small bottle of infant CPR instructions was tucked into a corner. She grabbed it, her fingers trembling as she flipped it open. The instructions were simple, basic, and yet they gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She had no time to waste. The baby's life hung in the balance, and it was up to her to act, even if it was just for a few more minutes of life. Olivia gently placed the baby back down in the crib and positioned herself at its side, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She had to be calm. She couldn't let her panic take over now. With every step she took, she focused on the baby, her hands moving with precision despite the chaos in her mind. The first step was to clear the airway. Olivia tilted the baby's head back gently and checked for any obstructions. Her hands were steady now, moving with a newfound confidence. She had to make this work. She had to. After checking the baby's airway, she began performing the chest compressions. Pressing down carefully but firmly, she tried to focus on the rhythm of each push. 1, 2, 3. She counted in her head, her heart pounding with each beat. Would this work? Would she be able to save this baby before it was too late? Her mind raced as she continued the compressions. Each second felt like an eternity. She glanced back at the man once, but he hadn't moved. His eyes were still fixed on her, distant and emotionless. Did he even care? Or had he truly resigned himself to the inevitable? Olivia didn't know, and honestly, she didn't care. She only had one focus now: the baby. She couldn't let it slip away. Not now, not like this. After several minutes, Olivia paused, her chest heaving with exhaustion. She checked the baby's pulse. It was faint, almost non-existent. Her heart sank, and a sharp wave of panic washed over her. This wasn't working. The baby was slipping further away from her grasp, but she wouldn't stop. She couldn't. She took another deep breath and continued. She started mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, blowing gently into the baby's tiny mouth, making sure to give just enough air to help. She alternated between compressions and breaths, never letting up, never slowing down. Time was running out, but she couldn't bring herself to let go. The thought of giving up, of leaving this child to die alone, was unbearable. Minutes passed. Each one felt like a lifetime, stretching out before her like an endless road. But then, something strange happened. The baby's chest, just slightly, rose. A small breath. A glimmer of life. Olivia's eyes widened as she leaned closer, waiting for more. The room felt so still, so quiet, like the world was holding its breath along with her. Another breath. The baby's tiny chest lifted again, a sign that her efforts hadn't been in vain. A spark of hope ignited within her. Could it be possible? Could this little one actually pull through? Olivia's heart raced faster, her focus sharp as she continued her efforts. She knew it wasn't over yet. The battle was far from won, but for the first time since she had entered this room, she felt a sense of relief. The baby was fighting back. It wasn't ready to give up just yet. In that moment, something shifted within her. She had been so sure that she was powerless, so certain that this was beyond her control. But now, the baby was responding. It was a fragile victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Olivia glanced back at the man, expecting him to say something, anything. She was eager for some kind of acknowledgement, some sign that he recognized the significance of what was happening. But there was nothing. His expression hadn't changed. His cold gaze was still fixed on the scene in front of him, his face as impassive as ever. Her breath hitched in her throat as she returned her focus to the baby. This wasn't about him. It was about the baby. She wasn't going to let anything distract her now. With every compress and every breath, Olivia poured everything she had into this moment. She wasn't going to let this baby slip through her fingers. She wasn't going to give up, not when it mattered most. The moment of truth. Olivia's hands were beginning to ache from the pressure of her chest compressions. The baby was so small, so fragile. Each push felt like it was draining her own strength, yet she didn't dare stop. She couldn't. Not when there was a glimmer of life, so faint, so fragile, coming from this tiny child. Her movements were automatic now, each one building on the last. Breath, compress, breath, compress. She could feel sweat beating on her forehead, the exhaustion creeping into her limbs, but she pushed it all aside. She had to. There was no time for doubt, no time for weakness. The seconds stretched on like a never-ending loop. Her mind was only focused on the baby in front of her, the faint rise and fall of its chest. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the room pressing down on her. This was a fight for survival, and it felt like the odds were stacked against her. Olivia glanced over at the man again, her eyes pleading for something, anything from him. She had hoped for some sign of life, a shift in his stoic demeanor, but he remained just as impassive as ever. His eyes were locked on her movements, his posture stiff and unmoving. She couldn't tell if he was simply watching, observing, or if he was just resigned to the idea that it was too late to save the baby. But she didn't care. She couldn't. Her focus had to remain on the child, on this baby's fragile chance at life. "Please, come on," Olivia muttered under her breath, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Fight. Just fight." With every moment that passed, the baby seemed to get weaker again. The small chest that had been rising and falling so faintly now seemed to lose its rhythm. Olivia's heart pounded louder in her chest, the panic creeping back in. She could feel the weight of the room pressed down on her shoulders, suffocating her. The minutes felt like hours. Then, just as she was beginning to lose hope, it happened. The baby's chest gave a sudden, stronger rise. Olivia froze, her heart stuttering in her chest. Could it be? Had it really worked? She leaned in closer, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the baby's face. A soft gasp escaped her lips as the baby's lips, still blue, but now tinged with a hint of pink, started to show signs of life. The baby's eyes fluttered open just a fraction, the tiniest movement, but enough to make Olivia's pulse surge with relief. The tiny cry that followed was weak but unmistakable. It was a sound of life, a sound that cut through the silence like a bolt of lightning. A cry, a signal that this child wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes as she let out a shaky breath. She didn't know whether she should laugh or cry, but in that moment, the world seemed to come back into focus. The baby was breathing. It was alive. She had done it. But the room was still heavy with tension. The man hadn't moved, not even when the baby cried out. He was standing across the room, arms crossed, still watching with that same detached gaze. Olivia couldn't understand him. Why wasn't he reacting? This was a miracle, a life saved. Why was he so cold, so distant? She felt the anger rising inside her again, the frustration she had been suppressing throughout the ordeal. How could someone stand there, unmoved, while a life hung in the balance? She didn't have time for his indifference. She turned her attention back to the baby, checking its breathing again, her hands gently caressing the child's small chest as she continued to monitor its progress. The baby's color was improving slowly, its breathing becoming more regular. It was alive. "Thank God," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible as she wiped away the tears that had started to fall down her cheeks. She felt like she had been holding her breath for hours, and now, finally, she could exhale. But there was still so much to do. The baby wasn't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. She knew that. The fact that it was breathing was a victory, but there was still a long way to go. She had to get help. She couldn't do this alone. The man had finally moved, though only slightly. He uncrossed his arms and took a single step forward, his gaze finally shifting toward the baby. For the first time, Olivia saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something. Was it surprise? Shock? Or maybe, just maybe, a small spark of admiration for what she had done? "I didn't think," he started, his voice softer than before. But before he could finish, he shook his head and walked over to the crib, his movements stiff and mechanical. "You shouldn't have done that." Olivia's chest tightened. She had expected a different response, perhaps gratitude, or at the very least a word of thanks. But this This was not what she had imagined. She stepped back, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "I couldn't just leave it," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions raging inside her. "I couldn't walk away." For a long moment, the man said nothing. He simply stood there, his eyes on the baby, then back to Olivia. His expression had shifted from cold detachment to something else, something harder to place. Finally, he spoke again, his voice much softer this time. "You're right. You did the right thing." The words felt like a weight lifting off her shoulders. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reassure her that what she had done mattered. It was the first time she had seen any sort of recognition in his eyes, and that was enough for now. As the baby continued to breathe more steadily, Olivia allowed herself a moment to breathe as well. There was still much to do, and the future remained uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she had made a difference. A tiny, fragile life had been saved, and it was because she refused to give up. The unexpected revelation. The baby's breathing had become more stable, and its color had returned to something resembling normal. Olivia sat back on her heels, feeling a deep sense of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had actually done it. The tension in the room, once suffocating, now seemed to dissipate as the baby's life hung in the balance, restored at least for now. Her heart still raced in her chest, but there was no longer any panic. There was only a quiet, intense satisfaction. As she watched the baby, her mind began to clear, her emotions settling. But the silence of the room, the stillness between her and the man, weighed heavily on her once more. He had been there, barely reacting, barely acknowledging the gravity of the situation. For a moment, Olivia thought he might finally speak, offer some sign of relief, some kind of expression of gratitude, but nothing came. He remained standing beside the crib, his eyes fixed on the baby, and for the first time, Olivia noticed the faintest flicker of something in his expression. It wasn't surprise, nor was it admiration. No, it was something else. Something darker. Something hidden. Was it guilt? Regret? She couldn't quite place it, but the more she looked at him, the more unsettling it became. "You're not going to call anyone?" Olivia asked, her voice firm, but still touched by the exhaustion of the moment. "You should really get a doctor in here." The man's eyes slowly turned toward her, and for the first time since he had entered the room, he looked her in the eye. There was a coldness there, something distant. But there was also something else. A quiet, almost reluctant acknowledgement of what had just occurred. He didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to the baby, bending down to gently lift it from the crib. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. Was he going to take the baby away now? Was he going to stop the help that had saved its life? But he didn't. His hands were careful as he cradled the baby against his chest. His movements were precise, as though every gesture was part of a carefully orchestrated plan. It was then that Olivia realized just how much control he seemed to have over everything. His calm, his detachment. It wasn't just apathy. It was a studied, deliberate calm, as if he had done this before. "What are you going to do?" Olivia asked, a sense of unease creeping into her voice. "You can't just ignore this. You need help, professional help." He looked at her, his gaze piercing, yet there was something almost unreadable about it. "I don't think you understand," he said quietly. "There's nothing to fix. It's already been done." Olivia blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" The baby was turning blue, its life was hanging by a thread. "You can't just walk away from that." The man's lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment, he said nothing. He turned away from her, still holding the baby carefully in his arms, and moved to the large leather sofa in the corner of the room. There, he sat down slowly, the weight of the baby cradled gently in his hands. Olivia stood frozen, her body still tense with the aftershocks of what had just happened. She wasn't sure whether she should be relieved that the baby was alive, or confused and frustrated by the man's behavior. He hadn't reacted like anyone would in such a life-or-death situation. She took a step forward, her voice a little shakier now. "I don't get it. Why are you acting like this? This is a baby's life, and you. She stopped herself, trying to keep her composure. You don't even seem surprised, or grateful, or anything. The man didn't immediately respond. He looked down at the baby, his gaze softening slightly as he adjusted the child in his arms. There was a brief moment of silence before he spoke again, his voice quieter, almost like he was speaking to himself. Do you know who this child is? His words caught Olivia off guard, and she shook her head, confused. No, she replied. I thought this was just a job. I came in to clean. I didn't know anything about the family. The man looked at her, his eyes dark but intense. This baby is my son. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, trying to make sense of his words. Your son? But how? Why didn't you do something sooner? He exhaled slowly, a mixture of frustration and resignation in his posture. Because I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to be here. Olivia's mind raced as she tried to make sense of his cryptic words. What was he saying? This man, this stranger, was the father of the child she had just saved. The baby was his son. But if he was the father, why had he been so detached? Why had he stood there, watching, while she performed the life-saving measures on his own flesh and blood? Why hadn't he acted sooner? Why didn't you help? Olivia asked again, her voice rising, though she tried to keep her composure. Your son was dying, and you just stood there. The man's face hardened, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something anger, maybe. His eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched. You don't understand, he said, his voice cold. I can't just act on impulse. I have rules, I have to follow them. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at him, trying to comprehend his words. Rules? What kind of rules could be so important that they overrode the life of a child? I don't know what kind of world you're living in, Olivia said, shaking her head. But in this one, children's lives come first. He looked at her then, a strange flicker of something in his eyes, maybe regret, or maybe the smallest hint of admiration. But whatever it was gone as quickly as it came. I know, he said quietly, but that's not how things work for me. Olivia stood there speechless as he looked down at his son. The baby had fallen asleep in his arms, the rhythmic rise and fall of its chest now steady. But Olivia knew there was so much more to this story than he was telling her. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that she had only just scratched the surface. As the room grew quiet again, Olivia realized something. She had done what most people would never do. She had saved a life, and in that, she had proved to herself that she wasn't just the cleaner. She was someone who could make a difference when it truly mattered, and that was something she could hold on to. The truth beneath the surface. Olivia stood in the silence of the room, her heart still racing, but now with a different kind of intensity. She had saved the baby. She had acted without thinking, without knowing the consequences. And for a fleeting moment, she thought that perhaps, despite everything, this would be the moment where her life could change for the better. But the atmosphere in the room had shifted again. The weight of the man's words, the cold distance in his eyes, made her feel like an outsider in a world that didn't make sense. His son. This was the man's son. She had saved the child, but what was really happening here? The more Olivia tried to make sense of it, the more everything seemed to slip through her fingers. The strange detachment of the man, the way he had refused to act earlier, stayed with her, gnawing at her thoughts. She couldn't understand why he had acted the way he had. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to this family than she could see. Or perhaps this world she had stepped into, the world of the rich and powerful, was so out of touch with reality that she would never fully comprehend it. Taking a step forward, she cleared her throat, trying to gather her thoughts. I don't understand, she said, her voice steady, but laced with frustration. Why didn't you help? Your son was in trouble, and you… She stopped herself, shaking her head in disbelief. You just let me do everything. He looked up from the baby, his gaze distant once more. It's complicated. Olivia crossed her arms, a tinge of impatience creeping into her tone. Complicated? A child's life isn't complicated. You should have been the one saving him. The man's jaw tightened, but he said nothing for a long moment. Then, as if finally making a decision, he spoke again, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. "You don't know who I am. You don't know what I've had to sacrifice." Her eyes narrowed in confusion. "What do you mean by that?" He looked at her then, truly looked at her, for the first time since the baby had cried. There was something raw in his expression now, a flicker of vulnerability beneath the polished exterior. "I'm not like other people," he said, his voice low. "I can't afford to act impulsively, to let emotions cloud my judgment. Every decision I make, every move I make, has consequences. There are forces at play in my life, things I can't control." Olivia felt her brow furrow as she tried to process his words. Forces at play? What was he talking about? She had never thought of herself as someone who would be caught up in someone else's drama, especially not in a world so foreign to her. Yet here she was, staring at a man who seemed to live in a realm she could never hope to understand. "So, what does that mean?" she asked, her voice still firm, though there was a touch of uncertainty in her words. "Are you telling me you couldn't help your own son because of some rules? Some things you can't control?" He nodded slowly, his expression solemn. "Yes, you saved him. But that's not the end of this. There's more to it, more than you could possibly imagine." Olivia's pulse quickened. She had already realized that this situation was anything but simple, but now she could feel the weight of his words bearing down on her. This wasn't just about a baby in a crisis. This was something far more complicated, far more dangerous than she had bargained for. "What do you mean?" she asked again, more urgently this time. "What's going on? What's really happening here?" He sighed, his eyes flicking down to the baby in his arms, who was still breathing steadily but had not yet fully regained consciousness. "I'm involved in things that I can't just walk away from. The people I answer to, the ones who control the flow of my life, they won't let me act without permission. Everything is calculated. Every decision is weighed carefully." Olivia felt a chill creep up her spine. She was starting to understand, but she didn't want to. She didn't want to accept that the man sitting in front of her was so caught up in a world of power and control that the life of his own child had become just another part of the game. "You're telling me you're not free?" she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You're trapped by these people? You can't even save your son?" He looked at her, his eyes dark and weary. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." She took a step back, the weight of his words settling heavily on her chest. This wasn't a world she wanted to be part of. This wasn't the kind of life she had imagined for herself. And yet, by saving this child, she had unwittingly stepped into a world of shadows and secrets. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, until Olivia finally broke it with a question she had been avoiding. "So, what now? What happens to the baby?" The man's expression softened as he glanced down at the child in his arms. "Now, we go home. We pretend nothing happened. But you'll have to forget this. Forget everything. It's safer for you that way." Her heart dropped. "What do you mean, forget? I saved him. And now you want me to pretend this never happened?" His eyes were unreadable, cold, calculating. "Yes, for your own safety, you have to walk away. There's nothing for you here. You don't belong in this world, Olivia." His words stung, but she couldn't bring herself to argue. He was right. She didn't belong here. She had never belonged in a world where rules were more important than people, where lives were treated like pawns on a chessboard. She swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had done the right thing. She had saved a life. But now it seemed like that very act of heroism had dragged her into something far darker than she could ever have imagined. The man stood up slowly, cradling the baby as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. "You'll forget this," he repeated. "You have to." Olivia nodded, though a part of her was unwilling to accept it. This wasn't the end. She knew that now. Something had shifted inside her, something deep and unshakable. She couldn't unsee what she had witnessed. But for now, all she could do was walk away. The unseen consequences. Olivia couldn't shake the man's words from her mind, no matter how hard she tried. Forget everything. It echoed in her thoughts, repeating itself like an unwanted mantra. How could she forget? How could she forget that she had saved a life, only to be told to walk away as though it meant nothing? The weight of his directive sat heavy on her shoulders, and yet, the harder she tried to push it out, the more it consumed her. The man, his cold demeanor never faltering, had walked out with the baby. He didn't look back. Olivia was left standing in the same pristine room, the same silence enveloping her, the same unsettling feeling creeping up her spine. She had done the right thing. There was no question about that. But the world she had stepped into felt like something out of her control, something she had no place in. It wasn't just the baby's life that had been on the line. It was her own life too. She couldn't help but feel like she had been a pawn in someone else's game, a game she didn't understand and didn't want to be part of. The more she thought about the man's words, the more she realized that there was something deeply wrong with everything that had happened. How had she gone from cleaning a house to saving a baby's life? How had she gotten caught up in a world of secrets, of power, and of control? Olivia stepped back, glancing around the room as though it might hold some clue to unravel the mystery of what had just happened. The house seemed empty, its luxury no longer a source of awe, but a reminder of a world that existed far beyond her reach. She picked up her cleaning supplies, not even bothering to finish her task. The room was still immaculate, everything in its place, just as it had been when she arrived. But now, it felt suffocating. The silence felt like a lie. It wasn't real. Something dark lingered in the air, something unspoken, something that Olivia wasn't sure she could ever escape. As she made her way out of the house, the cool air hit her face, but it did little to clear her mind. Her thoughts were clouded with questions, with doubts, with anger. The man's cryptic words lingered, his coldness haunting her. She didn't belong in that world, he had said. But what did that mean for her now? What was left for her to hold on to? Olivia didn't know how long she walked, but by the time she made it back to her small apartment, she felt like a different person. She tossed her keys onto the table and sank into the chair, exhaustion overtaking her body. But it wasn't just physical fatigue. It was the emotional toll of what had happened, of witnessing something she couldn't quite understand. She tried to tell herself that it was over. She had saved the baby. That was all that mattered. She had done what any decent person would do. But the truth was, she couldn't forget. Not yet. Not until she figured out what had really happened. The man's face kept flashing in her mind, his eyes cold and calculating. She could still feel the tension in the room when he had held the baby, the way he had cradled it like it was the most delicate thing in the world, and then the way he had dismissed everything with one sentence: forget. It was like a knot in her stomach, an uncomfortable feeling that wouldn't go away. There was something more to him, something hidden beneath his stoic exterior, something that went beyond the surface of wealth and power. She had seen it in his eyes. Just for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability. It was almost as if he wanted to be human, wanted to be something more than just a product of the world he had created for himself. But he couldn't. Not in this life. Not with the kind of people he was tied to. Olivia leaned back in the chair, rubbing her eyes as if to clear away the fog. She needed answers. She couldn't just let it go. Something wasn't right, and she had to know what it was. She wasn't about to let this mystery slip through her fingers. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of her phone. She grabbed it quickly, half expecting it to be one of her friends or family checking in. But when she saw the caller ID, her breath caught in her throat. It was a number she didn't recognize, a number with the same area code as the mansion. Cautiously, she answered the phone. Hello? The voice on the other end was smooth, cold, and unfamiliar. Olivia, I think we need to talk. Her heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this. The calm, authoritative voice. Like the man from earlier, there was no mistaking it. He was reaching out, and this time, he wasn't going to let her walk away so easily. "I don't know who you are," Olivia said, her voice shaky but firm. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm done." The voice chuckled softly, almost as if amused by her response. "I don't think you are. You've made a decision, and now you have a choice. You can either forget what happened, walk away, and pretend this never happened, or you can choose to know more. Choose to understand what you've really stumbled into." Olivia's grip tightened on the phone. She could feel her pulse quickening, her nerves on edge. "What do you want from me?" The voice was almost too calm, too measured. "Nothing. I just want you to know that you're not as free as you think. You're already involved, Olivia, whether you like it or not." And just like that, the line went dead. Olivia sat there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to her ear. The weight of the words echoed in her mind. "You're already involved." It was the same thing the man had said. Only now it was clear. There was no walking away. There was no forgetting. Whatever world she had stepped into, it wasn't something she could just erase from her life. She had saved a life, yes, but now she was trapped in something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The web tightens. Olivia sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, the voice on the other end nothing but silence now. Her pulse was racing, her mind whirling with the implications of what had just happened. What did it mean that she was already involved? What choice was she supposed to make? She placed the phone down slowly, her fingers numb, as if the weight of the conversation had drained all the energy from her body. Her heart thudded in her chest, and her thoughts raced in every direction. The man's cold words replayed in her head. "You're already involved." Involved in what? She had done nothing but show up for a cleaning job. She had saved a baby's life, yes, but that was all. She didn't want to be a part of whatever twisted world he was referring to. She didn't even want to think about it. But that wasn't the choice she had anymore. The phone call had made it clear she was entangled in something far beyond her comprehension. And now, it seemed that someone or something was watching her, pulling strings she couldn't see. Olivia stood up from the chair, her legs shaky as she paced back and forth in the small, dimly lit apartment. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound she could hear. It was the same quiet that had once brought her comfort, but now it was suffocating. She needed answers. She needed to know why she was caught up in this, why someone had just threatened her with the possibility of never being able to escape it. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to break free from this. But how? She grabbed her purse from the counter and pulled out a notepad she'd been using for work. Her mind scrambled to remember the details of the man's family, the mansion, the baby, and all of the strange moments that had unfolded since she stepped into that world. She wrote down the name of the man, the only name she knew, and a few details from their brief interaction. Jonas Richmond. The name rang in her mind, unfamiliar yet haunting. Why did it sound so important? She had never heard of the Richmond family before, but there was something about Jonas that tugged at her memory. Something about the way he carried himself, the control he had over the room, the way he seemed both present and distant at the same time. She needed to find out who he really was. She needed to understand what had just happened. The phone rang again, snapping her out of her thoughts. This time, she didn't hesitate to answer. She had a feeling she knew who it was. "Olivia," the voice said, once again cold and measured. "I'm giving you a chance to walk away. Don't make the mistake of ignoring this. There are things in motion, and you're already in the middle of it." Her breath hitched, and she gripped the phone tighter. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice more assertive now. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" The voice on the other end didn't falter. "I'm not the one who's been keeping you here, Olivia. You've made your choice by saving him. Now the question is, what are you going to do with that choice?" "Are you threatening me?" Olivia's voice shook slightly, but she stood her ground. She couldn't let fear control her anymore. "No," the voice replied. "We don't need to threaten you. You're already involved, whether you realize it or not. This isn't about what you did for the baby. It's about what happens next. You've seen things. You know too much." "Then tell me what's going on," she shot back, frustrated. "Tell me why you're doing this." The line went silent for a moment, as if the person on the other end was considering her words. When the voice returned, it was even colder than before. "This is bigger than you, bigger than anything you understand. Jonas Richmond is not just anyone. He's involved in things that affect a lot of people. And if you're not careful, you could get caught in something you can't walk away from." A chill ran down Olivia's spine, and for the first time she understood. She had saved a baby. But in doing so, she had inadvertently opened a door to a world full of danger, secrets, and power she couldn't even begin to fathom. "I'm not part of your world," she said quietly, though doubt started creeping into her words. "I don't want to be." The voice sighed, almost in pity. "You already are." The line clicked dead, leaving her staring at her phone in disbelief. The room around her felt colder, darker, as though the very walls were closing in. She had saved a life, but now it seemed like that single act had thrown her into the middle of something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Olivia dropped the phone onto the table, her hands trembling. She felt trapped. There was no way out. Even if she tried to leave, the mere fact that she had saved the baby meant she was tied to this world now, whether she wanted to be or not. She ran a hand through her hair, trying to calm herself. She needed to think, to make a plan. The first thing she had to do was find out more about Jonas Richmond. And then maybe, just maybe, she could figure out how to escape this web she had found herself in. Olivia wasn't naive enough to believe she could walk away from this. But she wasn't going to give up either. She had saved a life. She wasn't about to let someone else control her life from the shadows. Whatever she had to do, she was going to fight to take back control. The next step was clear. She needed to find out everything she could about the Richmond family, about Jonas, and about the secrets they were hiding. But even as she prepared herself to dig deeper, something in her gut told her that the truth would be far darker than anything she could have imagined. And once she started unraveling this thread, there would be no going back. Unraveling the past. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a deep, gnawing sensation that had settled in her chest ever since the call. She had known from the moment she stepped into the Richmond mansion that her life would never be the same. But now, it felt like the past few days were just the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous story. She had spent the past several hours in her small apartment trying to piece together the information she had, but it felt like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. She had no real connection to the Richmond family, no idea who Jonas Richmond really was, and yet her entire existence now seemed tethered to his world in ways she couldn't explain. The phone call had shaken her. "You're already involved," they had said. She had dismissed it at first, but now, with every hour that passed, she felt it more deeply. The weight of their words hung over her, pressing on her chest like a heavy stone. There was no going back. She was in this, whether she wanted to be or not. Olivia had learned from her years of cleaning rich people's homes that appearances were often deceiving. The wealth, the luxury, it was all a facade. Behind it, there were secrets, power struggles, and dangerous people. And Jonas Richmond was no different. He wasn't just some businessman or billionaire who ran a company. No. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Jonas was tied to something much darker, something that had power and influence beyond anything she had ever encountered. She needed answers. After a restless night of turning her thoughts over and over, Olivia had made a decision. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone to come to her with the answers. She needed to take control. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that her only chance at understanding what was happening, at even surviving, was to uncover the truth about Jonas Richmond and his family. She grabbed her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys as she typed in the name Jonas Richmond. The search results were predictably sparse. He wasn't a public figure, at least not in the way she had expected. His name appeared in the context of private businesses, high-end real estate transactions, and vague references to philanthropic efforts that seemed more like well-curated publicity stunts than genuine acts of kindness. But there was one detail that caught her eye, a mention of the Richmond family's involvement in a series of controversial land deals, some of which were tied to an underground network of influential elites. The name Richmond Enterprises kept coming up, but nothing concrete. It was all whispers and rumors. Still, the sheer secrecy surrounding the family gave Olivia the sense that there was something far more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard, a strange unease settling in her stomach. She had just begun digging, but the implications were already clear. This wasn't a simple case of a rich family hiding in plain sight. This was something much bigger, and it was clear she had stumbled into it without fully understanding the consequences. Her phone rang again, interrupting her thoughts. This time, she didn't need to check the number. It was him, Jonas. "Olivia." His voice was calm, controlled as ever, but there was a subtle undercurrent of something. What, exactly, she wasn't sure. "I see you've been looking into things." She felt her heart race. "What do you want from me?" Her voice was low, controlled, but inside she was shaking. She wasn't ready for whatever was coming next. "I told you that you were already involved," he replied, the words sounding almost too casual. "You can't back out now." "Why not?" Olivia demanded. "Why can't I just walk away from this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Jonas's voice softened, just slightly. "Because, Olivia, you know too much now. And you're not the only one watching. You've opened a door you can't close." Her pulse quickened. "What does that mean? What is it you're really involved in?" Jonas sighed, a sound that almost seemed like a combination of frustration and something else, something darker. "I didn't want you to know this, but there's no more hiding it. I've been trying to keep you away from it all, but now that you've saved my son, I can't protect you from the truth anymore." Olivia's mind spun. "What truth?" she demanded. "What aren't you telling me?" Jonas's voice became colder, more distant. "You've stumbled into something much bigger than you could ever imagine, Olivia. You saved my son, but you also saved yourself from something far worse. You've tied yourself to me, to my family, and to the people we answer to. You don't even know who you're really dealing with." Olivia felt a chill spread through her body. She had saved the baby, yes, but it seemed that act alone had woven her into something far more sinister than she had realized. "Who are you, really?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this? What are you involved in?" Another silence stretched between them, and when Jonas finally spoke again, his words were barely audible, yet laden with weight. "You'll find out soon enough. But understand this, there are forces beyond our control, Olivia. People who have their hands in everything, from politics to business. And once you're in, there's no way out. No one ever really escapes." His words hung in the air, suffocating her, drowning her with the weight of their implications. She had always known there were powerful people out there, but this was different. This wasn't just about wealth, it was about influence, manipulation, and a network so vast it had a chokehold on everything. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered, her voice trembling now. "I know," Jonas said softly, almost as if he were regretting something, though his tone remained impassive. "But now you're part of it, and you'll have to make a choice." "A choice?" she repeated, her heart racing. "What choice?" Jonas was quiet for a moment before responding. "You'll have to decide if you want to stay and fight, or if you want to leave it all behind. But be warned, if you choose to leave, there will be consequences. They always come." The line went dead. Olivia stood there, frozen, her mind reeling. The call had ended, but the weight of it pressed down on her harder than anything she had ever felt before. She had just been handed the truth, a truth that felt like a death sentence. No matter what she chose, she was trapped, and the only way out was a path she wasn't ready to walk. But the question remained, would she choose to fight, or would she turn away, knowing that she could never escape the web that had now ensnared her? The breaking point. The silence after the call was suffocating. Olivia stood in the middle of her cramped apartment, her hands shaking, her heart racing in her chest. She couldn't tell if she was relieved or terrified. The truth, what Jonas had just confessed, was like a dark cloud pressing down on her. She had thought saving that baby would be the end of it. A moment of courage, of kindness, and then back to her life. But now, she realized that she had been far too naive. "You're already involved," Jonas's words echoed in her mind, each repetition making her chest tighten more. She had saved a child. That's all she had wanted to do. But now, that simple act had chained her to something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. She had no way of knowing who these forces were or what kind of power they truly had. But the fear in Jonas's voice, however carefully he tried to hide it, was enough to convince her that this wasn't something she could easily walk away from. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her spiraling thoughts. She didn't even have to look to know who it was. Jonas had a way of tracking her, of controlling the flow of information in ways that made her feel like a puppet on a string. This was a game she hadn't signed up for, and yet, here she was. With a heavy sigh, she picked up the phone, staring at the screen for a moment before answering. "What now?" she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Olivia," the voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. It was Jonas again. "I know you're scared. I know this is a lot for you to process, but you need to understand that this is bigger than both of us. You've stepped into something now. There's no turning back." She could feel her pulse quicken. "Then tell me the truth. What is all of this?" Her voice cracked, frustration bubbling up. "I don't want to be part of your world. I never did." "You already are." Jonas's voice was more matter-of-fact now. "You saved my son, and in doing that, you made yourself a part of my life, whether you like it or not. This isn't something you can just erase." "Tell me why. Why can't I walk away?" Olivia's voice was rising with each word, her anger spilling over. She had never felt so trapped in her life. "Because you know too much now," Jonas replied. His voice softened, but there was still an edge to it. "The moment you saved him, you became a part of this. People are watching you, Olivia. There are people who won't let you walk away, and if you try, they'll make sure you don't." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of his words settled over her like a stone, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to scream, to yell at him for pulling her into this nightmare. But the truth was, she was already in too deep. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, barely able to keep her voice steady. "I didn't ask to be dragged into your mess." Jonas sighed, a sound that mixed frustration with something else, maybe regret. "I know. I never wanted you involved in this. But now that you are, you have to choose. You either accept the consequences of your actions, or you walk away and face the consequences of that." "Walk away?" Olivia repeated, the bitterness clear in her voice. "How can I walk away from something like this? You don't get it. You've ruined my life." Jonas paused, and for the first time, there was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Olivia could almost hear him weighing his words. Then he spoke again, quieter now. "You haven't ruined your life, Olivia. You've just opened a door to something new, and you have a choice now, fight or walk away. But understand this, if you choose to fight, it will cost you more than you can imagine." "What are you saying?" Her throat tightened, panic creeping into her words. "I don't know what any of this means." Jonas didn't answer right away, but Olivia could hear him moving, the soft rustle of something in the background. His words came out slowly, almost like he was choosing them carefully. "There are people who run this city, Olivia, people who pull the strings behind the scenes, and they don't like loose ends. They don't like anyone interfering with their plans." "I'm not interfering with anyone's plans," she shouted, frustration reaching a boiling point. "I'm just trying to survive here. I didn't ask for this. You think I want to be tied to you, to your family, To all of your secrets? Survival? He repeated, his voice growing colder. You think you have a choice in how you survive now? You don't. You're already tangled in this. The moment you saved my son, you made a decision. And now, you're going to have to live with it. I don't want this life. Olivia's voice was shaky now, the anger giving way to raw emotion. She hadn't expected to feel so vulnerable, so exposed. But Jonas had pushed her to this point. And now she couldn't help but feel the gravity of the situation pressing down on her. Then you can try to escape it, Jonas said flatly. But know that escape isn't an option. If you run, they'll come for you. And when they do, it won't just be your life that's on the line. It'll be everyone you care about. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her mind raced, the reality of his words settling in. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom, now she was fighting for the lives of everyone around her. Jonas had made it clear. There was no escape from this, no way out. She had crossed a line, and now the only thing left was to face the consequences. The line went silent as the weight of the situation hung in the air between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want me to do? Jonas's response was quiet, but it carried the force of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. You don't have a choice. You'll do what I say. If you don't, there will be consequences, for you and for everyone you care about. Olivia felt her heart race as his words sank in. There was no way out, no easy answer. The web was tightening around her, and the only question left was how she would navigate it. One thing was certain, there was no going back. The point of no return. The weight of Jonas's words hung over Olivia like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. There was no going back, no running away from the tangled mess she had been thrust into. The walls of her small apartment suddenly felt too close, the air too heavy. She hadn't chosen this life, but now it felt as if the choice had been made for her the moment she saved that baby. Her heart pounded in her chest as she paced the room, trying to process the gravity of the situation. She had always prided herself on being independent, making her own decisions, not relying on anyone. But now it seemed that everything she had worked for, everything she believed in, was slipping away. She was trapped, and there was nothing she could do about it. Jonas had made it clear. There was no escape. If she tried to run, if she dared to defy the forces that controlled her now, there would be consequences. Her pulse quickened at the thought. The people he spoke of, the ones pulling the strings behind the scenes, had the power to destroy her life and everyone she loved. She was at their mercy. But as terrifying as it was, a part of Olivia's mind refused to accept defeat. She couldn't just bow to this darkness, couldn't allow herself to be another pawn in their game. She had saved that baby. There had to be some way to use that as leverage, some way to fight back. Her fingers clenched into fists as she moved toward the window, looking out at the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, the streets bustling with life, unaware of the shadow that had descended over her. She had lived in the city for years, always a small piece of the puzzle, just another face in the crowd. But now, it seemed the city itself had turned into a maze, a trap she couldn't escape. Olivia knew she had to make a choice. Jonas was right. In one sense, there was no going back. But there was still a part of her that wasn't ready to surrender. She had never been the type to back down from a challenge. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life. The question was, how could she fight back? What could she do with the little power she had? A sudden thought hit her. What if Jonas was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle? What if the key to her freedom lay not in confronting him directly, but in uncovering the truth behind the forces that controlled him? If she could expose them, if she could find a way to turn the tables, maybe, just maybe, she could regain control of her life. Her heart raced with a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let this happen to her. She wasn't going to be a victim in this world of shadows and manipulation. But first, she had to find out everything she could. She had to understand who Jonas really was, what kind of world he was involved in, and who these people were that controlled him. And she had to do it before they found a way to silence her. Olivia pulled out her phone again, her fingers moving quickly as she searched for any scrap of information she could find on Jonas Richmond and his family. She wasn't going to leave any stone unturned. She didn't care how dangerous it was, how deep she had to dig. She was in this now, and she was going to make sure that whatever came next, it would be on her terms. Hours passed as she combed through every article, every social media post, and every rumor she could find. Most of it was vague, nothing more than whispers about the Richmond family's involvement in politics, real estate, and business dealings. But there was something there, a pattern, a connection between Jonas and a few other powerful names in the city. She clicked on one article that caught her eye. It was an old news piece, buried deep within a thread of unrelated stories. It referenced an underground network of influential people tied to a series of high-stakes investments in foreign markets. The connections were sketchy at best, but it was a lead one that could unravel the entire web she had stepped into. She saved the article, her mind racing. There had to be something in here, some clue she could use to her advantage. If she could figure out who these people were, maybe she could turn them against Jonas, or at the very least, expose them. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Just as she was about to dive deeper into her research, her phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with an unknown number. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She knew it had to be Jonas. She didn't hesitate to pick up the call, her breath catching in her throat. Olivia. His voice was as calm as ever, but there was an undercurrent of something else, something almost like warning. I told you before, you don't get to make the rules here. You're involved now and there's no turning back. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak, keeping her voice steady, despite the rush of fear and anger surging inside her. I'm not going to sit back and let you control me. I won't be a pawn in your game. A brief silence followed, and when he spoke again, his tone shifted. It was almost impressed. You're more resourceful than I gave you credit for, but that won't change anything. You're already in too deep, and I'm not going to let you ruin what I've built. Built? Olivia snapped, unable to hold back the bitterness in her voice. What exactly have you built, Jonas? A kingdom of lies? There was a chuckle on the other end, low and mocking. Something like that. But you need to understand, Olivia, this isn't just about me and you. There are forces far beyond our control at play here. You don't have the luxury of choosing sides. Not anymore. I'll find a way out, she said, her voice filled with determination. I'll make you regret this. The line went silent again, and Olivia knew, deep down, that this was the point of no return. Jonas had just thrown down the gauntlet, and now she had no choice but to fight back. And she would. With every ounce of strength she would find a way to take back control. But the path ahead would be treacherous. She could already feel the web tightening around her, and she had no idea how far it reached or how dangerous the people were who were pulling the strings. One thing was for certain, though she wasn't going to let them win. The game begins. Olivia sat back in her chair, her hands shaking as she placed the phone down on the table. Jonas's words echoed in her mind, each one laced with threat and manipulation. You don't have the luxury of choosing sides. Not anymore. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply entangled she had become in this game she had never asked to play. But now there was no going back. The truth was, the moment she had saved that baby's life, she had crossed a line. A line she could never uncross. Now, she was part of something much bigger, something that she couldn't even fully comprehend yet. And the more Jonas had tried to convince her that she had no choice, the more she felt a fire burn inside her. She wasn't just going to lie down and let him win. She was going to fight back. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keyboard again as she scoured every possible lead she could find on the Richmond family. Jonas might think he had the upper hand, but she wasn't about to just sit back and accept her fate. There had to be a way to find a crack in this wall, some hidden weakness she could exploit. She wasn't naive enough to think she could take down Jonas or the powerful people he was connected to, but she knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't go down without a fight. Olivia's eyes flitted over the articles on the screen, articles about Richmond Enterprises, about Jonas's mysterious background, about their ties to foreign markets and corrupt politicians. There were no clear answers, just shadows and half-truths. But beneath the surface, she could feel it. There was something bigger here. Something that could destroy her life if she didn't act fast. As she dug deeper, her phone buzzed again. This time, she hesitated. Part of her knew it would be Jonas again, but she picked it up anyway. She had to know how far this game would go. Her thumb swiped across the screen, and his voice came through instantly, like he'd been waiting for her to pick up. Olivia, his voice was calm. Almost too calm, like he was in control of everything, including her fate. I hope you're not wasting your time. Wasting my time? She shot back, her voice sharp. I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this. You and your family have dragged me into something that I never wanted to be a part of. I don't care how powerful you think you are, I'm going to find a way out. There was a brief silence on the other end, and for a moment, Olivia thought he might hang up, but instead, he chuckled softly. You think you have a choice in this? You've already made your move, Olivia. You saved my son, and for that, you're now a part of this world. There's no escape. You've been marked. She clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to scream at him. Marked? She repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. You don't get it, Jonas. You're the one who's trapped, not me. I don't want any part of this world you're a part of. Jonas sighed, as though he were talking to a child who didn't understand. I've tried to keep you out of this, but now it's too late. You're in deeper than you think. Why don't you just let me go? Olivia pressed, feeling her anger rise again. What do you want from me? Nothing, he replied smoothly, though she could hear a trace of something colder underneath his words. I just want you to understand that there are things at play here that you can't begin to imagine. I'm not the one you should be worried about, Olivia. It's the people behind me, the ones who never forget a face. Her stomach tightened at his words. The people behind me. She had a feeling these were the same people Jonas had referred to earlier, the ones who controlled everything from the shadows, the ones who could make her disappear without a trace. You're not the first person to think they can get out of this world, Olivia, Jonas continued, his voice almost pitying now. But the thing is, when you're in for good. There's no clean break. So, why don't you just stop pretending you have a choice? You'll get hurt trying to fight this. People like me, we win. It's that simple. I don't need you to lecture me, she snapped, the frustration and fear she'd been holding back now spilling over. I'm not going to be part of your game. If I have to expose everything to the world, I will. Jonas was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that made her blood run cold. You can try, Olivia, but once you expose what you know, you'll have everyone coming after you, and you won't just be fighting me. You'll be fighting people who don't care who you are or what you've done. People who have been in this game much longer than you. Her mind spun, the weight of his words sinking in. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Jonas. This was about something much bigger, something far darker. And she had stepped right into the middle of it without knowing the full consequences. I won't let you control me, she said, the words barely escaping through clenched teeth. There was a long pause, and when Jonas spoke again, his voice was cold, almost regretful. I'm not trying to control you, Olivia. I'm just trying to keep you alive. You're playing with fire, and it's not too late to walk away. But if you push forward, well, then we'll see who survives. With that, the call ended. Olivia's mind raced as she set the phone down. Every part of her wanted to throw it across the room, to scream, to break something. But instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. She couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. She had a decision to make. Jonas's game had already started, and if she wanted any chance of surviving, she had to start playing by her own rules. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going down without a fight. Olivia stood up, the weight of the situation settling around her. She had to keep moving, keep digging, She had to expose the truth, even if it meant going up against the most dangerous people in the city. The game had begun, and now it was her turn to make the next move. The depths of deception. Olivia barely slept that night. The silence in her apartment felt almost suffocating, each hour dragging by as she tossed and turned, haunted by the conversation with Jonas. His voice still echoed in her mind. "You're in deeper than you think." Those words clung to her, and for the first time, she truly understood the weight of what she had stumbled into. The following morning, she forced herself out of bed, determined to take control. She couldn't afford to wait around anymore. Jonas's threats had rattled her, but she wasn't about to let him or the people behind him dictate her fate. She had to act, and she had to act fast. Her first step was clear. She needed more information. It had become painfully obvious that Jonas wasn't the real danger here. The power he wielded was part of a much larger network, a system of people who pulled the strings from the shadows. They were the ones she had to uncover, the ones who had been pulling her into their web the moment she saved that child. She sat at her desk, scrolling through pages of documents, articles, and random links, trying to make sense of everything she had collected. Richmond Enterprises, Jonas's family, they all seemed to be connected to a much more insidious underworld than she had ever realized. But it was all so cryptic, so deliberately concealed. But as she sifted through more articles, one thing became clear. Jonas was not just a businessman. He was part of an elite, closed-off circle that controlled major decisions across multiple industries. What had once seemed like the life of a rich, disconnected family was actually a far-reaching web of power, an empire built on manipulation and secrecy. Olivia felt sick to her stomach as she dug deeper. Every new fact she uncovered only seemed to confirm the depth of the lies. She had always been an outsider, someone who lived just outside the spotlight, never wanting or needing attention. But now, it seemed she was right in the middle of a world that operated by completely different rules. She had found something, a name buried deep in one of the articles she had saved, the Syndicate. It was a term that had shown up in whispers, half-formed sentences, and coded language. The more she researched it, the more she realized how powerful this shadow organization was. The Syndicate controlled vast amounts of wealth, had political influence in several countries, and seemed to have its hands in everything from illegal arms trading to high-profile financial fraud. And the worst part? Jonas was just a small player in their game. His family's wealth, his power, it was all tied to them. Olivia leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. The rabbit hole she had fallen into was much deeper than she ever anticipated. She was dealing with forces that could destroy not just her, but everything she had ever known. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't let fear control her. If she wanted to survive this, she had to uncover the truth. And to do that, she would have to go deeper, far deeper, into the heart of the Syndicate's operations. She needed help. For a moment, Olivia considered going to the police, but the thought made her stomach twist. She had no idea who she could trust. After all, anyone involved with the Syndicate could be compromised. She needed someone who was outside the web, someone who wasn't afraid to get their hands dirty. And then it hit her. There was one person who could potentially help her. He wasn't an ally in the traditional sense, but he had information, and he had the guts to act when no one else would. It was time to contact him again. She grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she had been avoiding. The number of Mason, the journalist she had once worked with on a minor story about corporate corruption. He had been skeptical, cynical even, but he had connections in places Olivia never dreamed of reaching. If anyone could help her uncover the truth, it was Mason. She hesitated before hitting dial, wondering how much he would really be willing to risk. She had no idea what kind of trouble this would bring him, but she also knew that this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about something much bigger. She couldn't do this alone. The phone rang, and when Mason's voice came through, it sounded tired but familiar. "Olivia, he said, recognizing her instantly. "I didn't think I'd be hearing from you again. What's going on?" "Listen, Mason," she said quickly, her voice low. "I need your help. I'm in deep, deeper than I ever realized. And it's not just me anymore, it's everyone around me." "Slow down," Mason cut in, his tone wary. "What do you mean? What's happening?" She took a deep breath and tried to steady her nerves. "I've uncovered something big. It's about Jonas Richmond and his family. They're involved in something far worse than I ever thought. There's an organization pulling the strings, controlling everything, and I think I've got a lead. But I can't do this alone." Mason was quiet for a long moment. Olivia could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed her words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice cautious but intrigued. "The Syndicate," he muttered, as if testing the words. "I've heard whispers, but I didn't think it was real. You're serious, aren't you?" "Completely," she replied. "I don't know who else to trust. They're watching me, and I don't know what they'll do if they find out I'm digging into this." There was another pause. "I'll help you," Mason said finally, his voice resolute. "But you need to understand the risks. We're not just talking about some corporate scam here. The Syndicate is dangerous. They'll do anything to protect themselves." "I know," Olivia said quietly, the weight of the danger finally hitting her. "But I don't have a choice anymore. I need to know the truth. I need to take them down before they take me down." Mason sighed. "All right, let's do this. But be careful, Olivia. This is more than just uncovering a story. This is about survival." The call ended, and Olivia felt a strange sense of resolve settle over her. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone in her corner, someone who could help her take on this unseen enemy. The game was getting more dangerous, but now she had an ally, and that was the first real hope she'd felt in days. Into the abyss, the weight of Mason's promise settled over Olivia like a cloak, heavy and uncertain. She wasn't alone anymore, but she wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. Mason was resourceful, and he had connections that could help her get to the heart of the Syndicate. But she also knew that they were stepping into a world far more dangerous than either of them had ever imagined. This wasn't just about corporate corruption anymore. It was about an underground network of power and influence that had its tendrils in every corner of society. And now, she was right in the middle of it. Mason told her to meet him in an hour at a small coffee shop downtown, a place that he trusted, one where no one would think to look for them. It wasn't much, but it was the best they could do. The more Olivia thought about it, the more she realized that they were being watched probably by people who had been keeping an eye on her since the moment she stepped into the mansion. Jonas had made it clear. There were no secrets here, and there was no one they wouldn't go after to keep their empire hidden. She didn't bother dressing up. She didn't need to. The world of the Richlands and their high society was a world she no longer wanted to be a part of. She threw on a worn leather jacket and a pair of jeans, trying to blend in as best she could. It wasn't about appearances anymore. It was about survival. And right now, survival meant finding out everything she could about the Syndicate and exposing them before they found a way to silence her for good. When she arrived at the coffee shop, the bell over the door jingled softly, and she scanned the room. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but then her eyes landed on Mason, sitting at the back, a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked the same, tired, worn down by years of chasing stories that had probably cost him more than he'd ever admit. But there was a new edge to him now, a seriousness that made Olivia uneasy. She walked over and sat across from him, her gaze sharp, scanning the surroundings. She couldn't help but feel like they were being watched, the kind of watchful eyes that had seen far too much and had a way of making people disappear. "You all right?" Mason asked quietly, his eyes flicking over her face, as if trying to read her. "I'm alive," Olivia replied, her voice tight. "But I don't know how much longer that's going to last." Mason nodded grimly, taking a sip from his coffee. "I don't need to tell you how deep this goes, but I think it's time you hear what I know." Olivia leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "What do you know about the Syndicate? About Jonas?" Mason exhaled slowly, setting his cup down. I've been tracking them for years, but they're good, too good at staying in the shadows. The syndicate's influence runs through everything. From arms deals to government corruption, they've got their hands in all of it. But here's the thing, they don't just control money. They control people. Olivia's heart sank. People? What do you mean by that? Mason looked at her, his gaze hardening. They've been manipulating high-level officials, business leaders, even ordinary citizens. They plant people in places of power, make deals with anyone who can help them control things. And if you get in their way, they make you disappear. Olivia's pulse quickened. The idea of such absolute power, of such manipulation, left a bitter taste in her mouth. And Jonas, she asked, her voice strained. What does he have to do with all of this? Mason hesitated for a moment before answering. Jonas is connected to the core of the syndicate. His family's wealth didn't come from real estate or investments. It came from making deals with the worst of the worst. And now, Jonas is the one running things, at least, on the surface. But there's someone higher up, someone pulling his strings. Olivia's thoughts raced. Who? She asked, almost desperate for answers. I don't know yet, Mason admitted, but I'm digging. There's a name that keeps coming up, Thorn. He's a ghost. No one knows exactly who he is or where he comes from, but every time someone talks about the syndicate, his name is tied to it. I think he's the one who holds the real power. The name hit Olivia like a punch to the stomach. Thorn. She had heard whispers, too. Rumors that there was someone behind the scenes, someone who was untouchable. But to hear Mason confirm it, to know that someone like Thorn existed, sent a chill down her spine. Do you think he's the one who's been pulling Jonas's strings? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mason nodded grimly. I think so. And I think he's the key to everything. If we want to bring down the syndicate, we need to find out who he is and how to get to him. Olivia leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the situation press down on her. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. She had known she was up against powerful people, but the magnitude of it, the sheer depth of the syndicate's influence, was overwhelming. We can't do this alone, Olivia said quietly. If we're going after Thorn, we'll need more than just information. We'll need allies, people who can help us take them down. Mason stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. You're right, and I know just the person who can help us. But be warned, getting involved with them will make this even more dangerous. If you want to go down that road, you'll have to be prepared for what comes next. Olivia didn't hesitate. I don't care how dangerous it is. I'm already in this. I'm not backing out now. Mason's eyes softened, but the steel in his voice remained. All right then. We move carefully. We dig deeper, and we make sure we're ready for what happens next. Olivia nodded, her resolve firming. She knew there was no turning back. This was a fight she couldn't walk away from, not anymore. The game was changing, and now she was ready to play. The hunter and the hunted. The days after meeting with Mason felt like a blur of tension and uncertainty. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that every step she took brought her closer to something dangerous, something she wasn't prepared for. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. She had no choice. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but there were still too many gaps. Jonas, the syndicate, Thorn, all of them were part of a world she couldn't understand, a world of shadows and lies. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized just how far-reaching their influence was. Every corner of the city seemed to be touched by their web of power, but she couldn't stop now. She had come too far, and if she didn't keep pushing forward, she would become just another victim in their game. The key to bringing them down, to stopping Jonas and Thorn, lay in uncovering the truth, every piece of it. She met Mason again a few days later. This time, they didn't meet in a quiet coffee shop or in the shadows. It was late at night, and they were standing outside an old, abandoned building in the city's industrial district. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline and oil, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. It was a perfect place for a clandestine meeting. "Did you find anything?" Olivia asked, her voice low as she looked around nervously. Mason gave her a grim smile, but there was a weariness in his eyes. "A lot, but it's not enough. We need more." They had been working in the shadows, digging into every lead they could find on Jonas, the Syndicate, and Thorne. But as much as they uncovered, there was always something just out of reach. Jonas was a difficult man to track. He had made sure to cover his tracks well. But Mason had connections, people who knew the dark corners of the city, people who could access information that was off limits to most. "Thorne's network is vast," Mason continued, his tone serious. "We're not just dealing with local corruption here. This is global. He has fingers in every pot: politics, business, law enforcement. And from what I've gathered, there's no one more dangerous than him. Not just because of his wealth, but because of what he knows. He has the power to destroy anyone who stands in his way." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. "And you think we can stop him?" Mason didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a manila folder from his jacket filled with documents and photos. He spread them out on the hood of his car. "I've got some names," he said quietly. "People who might know more about Thorne. But they're dangerous too. If we want answers, we need to get close to them, very close. And that means putting ourselves in the line of fire." Olivia stared down at the photos, images of people she didn't recognize, some of them with connections to businesses and government figures, others with known criminal backgrounds. These were the people who held the keys to unlocking the mystery behind Thorne. She studied one of the photos, a middle-aged man with sharp features standing outside a private club. He was well-dressed, but there was something off about the way he carried himself. He looked like someone who had spent years in the shadows, moving in and out of places where others feared to tread. "Who is this?" Olivia asked, pointing to the man in the photo. "That's Victor Easton," Mason replied, his voice low. "He's one of Thorne's most trusted associates. He's been involved in everything from money laundering to arms trafficking. If anyone knows how Thorne operates, it's him." Olivia nodded, her mind racing. This was the kind of person she needed to get close to. Someone with answers. Someone who could lead her to Thorne. But she also knew that getting close to Easton wasn't going to be easy. He didn't operate in public spaces. He moved behind the scenes, pulling strings while staying out of the spotlight. "How do we get to him?" Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the rising anxiety in her chest. Mason's eyes darkened and he shifted uncomfortably. "It's risky. We need to use his connections to get to him. We'll have to infiltrate his world, play the part of someone who belongs. And once we're in, we have to be careful. He's not someone you can trust, and if he even suspects that we're digging into his business, we're dead." Olivia swallowed hard. This was getting real. Every decision from here on out was going to have consequences, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for them. But deep down, she knew that there was no turning back now. "We don't have a choice," she said firmly. "We have to do this. For the baby, for everyone. We can't let people like Jonas and Thorne keep controlling everything." Mason nodded slowly. "You're right. We take this step, and there's no going back. But if we can get close to Easton, if we can get the information we need, we can take down the whole operation. We'll have to move quickly and carefully, but it's possible." Olivia felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. This was bigger than either of them, but there was no other option. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She was going to fight. She was going to expose Thorne, expose everything that had been hidden in the darkness for so long. "Let's do it," she said, her voice steady, her resolve clear. "We'll find a way in." Mason smiled grimly, his eyes hardening. "All right, but be prepared. We're stepping into the belly of the beast now." As Olivia walked away from the meeting, she knew that the next few days would be crucial. She was about to step into a world that had the power to break her. But she was ready to take the risk. Because one thing was certain, she wasn't going to let the Syndicate win. Not without a fight. The hunt had begun. In a world full of uncertainty and hidden forces, One of the most powerful lessons is the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. The story of Olivia highlights the truth that life often puts us in situations we didn't choose, but how we respond defines our path. We may feel trapped by circumstances or manipulated by powerful figures, but true strength lies in the ability to make our own choices, to fight for justice, and to uncover the truth. It's easy to feel powerless, but like Olivia, we all have the potential to fight back against what seems impossible. The key is not to let fear dictate our actions, but to use it as fuel for courage. Life isn't always fair, and the road to victory is rarely straightforward, but persistence, resourcefulness, and the willingness to step into the unknown can turn the tide. The lesson? You're never truly trapped unless you choose to be, no matter how powerful the forces at play. Keep fighting for what's right, and trust that every step you take toward truth, no matter how small, brings you closer to freedom. As the story wraps up, we can take a moment to breathe. The journey we've been on together, full of twists, turns, and unexpected moments, reminds us that even in the darkest times, there's a light that finds its way through. Whether it's the strength we find within ourselves or the courage that arises when we least expect it, we all have the power to face what seems impossible. Life, in all its unpredictability, has a way of testing us. But remember, just like in this story, we're never alone in our struggles. Sometimes the greatest moments of growth come when we least expect them, and the people who cross our paths can leave an imprint that lasts a lifetime. So hold on to that hope, let it guide you, and know that no matter the challenge, you have the strength to keep going. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Stories TH, and share your thoughts or even your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Remember, there's always a brighter day ahead, and every moment of courage makes a difference. Take care, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.